Good afternoon, everyone. In the recent months, there has been significant concerns over the cost of delivered electricity. These concerns will be worsened by the punishing federal pressures of decarbonizing our electricity system. I'm here today to draw awareness towards the real cost of these ideological efforts, and in the spirit of transparency, want to discuss the findings of an independent audit of the Alberta Balancing Pool. Finally, I want to highlight the need for governments to put affordability at the forefront of decarbonization efforts, as an energy transition that causes detrimental societal harm and suffering is not a sustainable path forward. Today, we are releasing a financial review into the Balancing Pool's financial losses from 2015 to 2019, as a result of the NDP's costly ideologies and willful disregard for the interests of Alberta ratepayers. The review provides clear confirmation of the $1.34 billion boondoggle created by the former NDP government. It also provides yet another reminder of the many costs that other governments have placed on Albertans, costs that are making utilities, gas, and everyday life more expensive than ever. Our government was elected on a promise to undertake a review of the Balancing Pool fiasco. This marks another promise kept to Albertans. For too long, Albertans have been left in the dark about exactly how much money the decisions made by the Notley government actually cost electricity taxpayers. There has been media stories and informal accounting of these losses, but no independent verification of how much was wasted on their ideological agenda. We promised to get Albertans answers, and those answers are confirmed in the document that we are releasing today. According to the independent review conducted by Deloitte, the policies undertaken by the previous government directly resulted in a $1.34 billion loss for Albertans. That is a $1.34 billion that should have stayed in Albertans' bank accounts and could have been applied to any number of programs to enhance our electricity system. Instead, it was wasted and exists today as ratepayer debt being paid off on electricity bills through a surcharge that's expected to run until 2030. To be clear, this loss was not the fault of the Balancing Pool, which was established to support Alberta's fair, efficient, and openly competitive electricity market. Its primary role was managing fixed price deals with electricity producers known as the Power Purchase Agreements, or PPAs, and that's what it did. The problem started when the previous government changed the specified gas emitters regulation to increase the carbon levy on heavy industrial emitters. This triggered a clause allowing money-losing PPAs to be returned to the Balancing Pool. It was a mistake that was purely driven by their leftist friends and ideological extremists, which we now know cost Albertans $1.34 billion. According to the financial review, the losses were largely due to losses from the sale of electricity and related services under the returned PPAs, payments made to settle disputes and terminated PPAs, and expenses for financing operations. This report is an important and necessary step as we move forward with acknowledging all the costs that were experienced on the Balancing Pool and paid for by all ratepayers. With expiry of the PPAs at the end of 2020, the Balancing Pool's main role is now over. That's why our government will begin to dissolve the Balancing Pool in the coming months. We will table new legislation in the coming weeks that starts this process, while still ensuring that the pool's obligations are resolved and its remaining responsibilities are fulfilled by appropriate bodies. I will have more to say about that work when the legislation is tabled. However, in many ways, this financial review points to another, possibly even greater problem: the many costs that Albertans are facing every day, which are making life more expensive and unaffordable. These costs are everywhere. They are seen on Alberta's utility bills, where they are still paying for the previous government's mistakes. Thankfully, we stopped another major mistake from happening, the move towards a capacity market, which experts estimate would have had unnecessarily cost Albertans many billions of dollars more. Albertans are still paying for the $7.5 billion in transmission infrastructure that was built from 2015 to 19, which was far more than we needed. There's also the costly federal carbon tax that Albertans don't want and that is championed by the Alberta NDP. Keeping in mind, Alberta was the first to responsibly bring in a carbon tax on industrial emitters years prior. The Liberal NDP alliance intentionally seeks to make life more expensive for everyday Albertans by punishing them to heat their homes in the winter or drive to work in rural areas, as if those habits could be reasonably reduced. The more Albertans pay for this scheme, the happier the alliance is to rake in the cash, without actually resulting in meaningful consumer GHG reductions. As you know, despite soaring inflation, the federal carbon tax increased to $2.63 per gigajoule on April 1. This means that an average home using about 11.25 gigajoules of natural gas each month is paying roughly $30 on every monthly bill. That's compared to $18 before April 1. I could go on and on. The problem is clear. Liberal and NDP politicians may say they care about cost of living, but if they did, they would approach decarbonization with more pragmatism and more concern for everyday Albertans. Thankfully, our government is working hard to provide real relief while undertaking the long-term solutions that our province desperately needs to keep life affordable amid decarbonization. Since April 1st, Albertans have seen the price of gas and diesel drop thanks to our decision to pause the collection of the provincial fuel tax. This keeps more money in Albertans' pockets at a time when costs for everyday goods are going up. Yesterday, we also tabled new legislation that, if passed, will enable electricity and natural gas rebates for nearly 2 million hardworking Albertans. Our focus has always been on being there for Albertans when they need support. Being fiscally responsible with taxpayer dollars to leave more money in their pockets and not burden future generations. And ensuring we are transparent with how we are managing their tax dollars. Releasing the report into the balancing pool will help Albertans understand the true cost of misplaced decisions by governments that let ideology take priority over the well-being of Albertans. As I mentioned, along with the release of today's financial review, we will soon begin winding down the balancing pool. This will be done in a careful, coordinated way. While the balancing pool's original intended purpose is coming to an end, it will sadly take up to 8 more years to pay off the nearly $700 million that it still owes from this mess. But the end result will help reduce the number of agencies and their costs on ratepayers, while maintaining an efficient and effective electricity system. Albertans deserved better and should not be tricked by promises to decrease utility bills with taxpayer-funded rate caps or other short-sighted policies that both contribute to inflation and do nothing to enhance future capacity or foster competition. The new electricity legislation that I will table soon will also include critical measures aimed at increasing competition and modernizing Alberta's electricity system. All of this important work takes time. The financial review released today shows that bad policies and ideology led to $1.34 billion in losses. That is unforgivable. But we are fixing the mistakes made by the NDP. We are embracing change and looking out for hardworking families and businesses. We are doing what it takes to support Albertans and to provide safe, reliable, and affordable electricity for consumers and a competitive market for investors. We need to NDP-proof the electricity system, and the best way to do that is to ensure they never get near the electricity grid again. Shining a light on their mismanagement of the balancing pool is an important first step. The second step is to wind down the balancing pool so no government can ever use it again to further their ideological agenda. Thank you, and I will now take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Minister. We have time for some questions. We'll start with in the room. If you could please state your name and your outlet.
Yes, thank you. Shalane Skolsky with CTV News Edmonton. I'm just wondering if you can provide any more information in regards to that upcoming legislation in terms of a timeline for winding down the balancing pool, as well as any conversations that I imagine are ongoing right now about who will take over those other duties of the balancing pool once it's dissolved.
Yeah, as you're aware, the main responsibilities of the balancing pool have expired, and they're now a sunset agency, and so this is about finding efficiencies for taxpayers taxpayers and reducing red tape. So we are in the process of assigning those responsibilities to other agencies, and we'll be finalizing that in the near future, and we'll be introducing that into the legislation or into the legislature in the coming weeks.
I guess just as a follow-up, if the balancing pool was created to help create or provide a more stable energy supply by dissolving it, I guess what assurances or guarantees are there that we aren't going to see a power shortage and we aren't going to see things like brownouts again?
Well, I can point to the last 12 months. We have seen unprecedented demand in our electricity system, and at a time when other jurisdictions were experiencing brownouts, our electricity system stood up to the test. We, the Alberta Electrical System Operator that is responsible for the safe, reliable and efficient electricity grid in this province, has done an excellent job, and it has stood up remarkably well, and it will continue to do so.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, Janet French from the CBC. If you listen to international reports, like from the IPCC, they say that we don't have the luxury of time to gradually phase out oil and gas products, coal at our convenience. And climate disasters cost billions of dollars. So what would you say to people who would argue that your government is not moving quickly and aggressively enough to address climate change?
Listen, we have said all along that it is the ideologies of progressive politicians that have created this energy crisis. If it wasn't for the investment-crushing carbon taxes that progressive politicians like Rachel Notley and Justin Trudeau appreciate, we would have seen more thermal generation come online. And because we haven't seen that thermal generation come online, because of their childlike enthusiasm for these carbon taxes, we currently have a lag between the supply and demand that is currently in the system. That's what's causing the price to go up. Now, you lay over atop the geopolitical events that's happening in Ukraine right now, and we have an energy crisis in Europe. And make no mistake, that energy crisis is coming to Canada, and we're going to do everything that we can to make sure that Albertans are protected from it.
I'm also extremely puzzled about why this report was necessary. Can you tell me how much it cost, and what did you find out that you didn't already know? I could go into the financial statements of the balancing pool of the government in Treasury Board and Finance and see exactly how much the balancing pool has lost over the last few years.
Well, there's the evidence up until now, of course, has been anecdotal for most Albertans. We had a conversation with Albertans, and they were outraged by how the NDP used an independent agency to further its ideological agenda. And so we made a campaign commitment that we're delivering on. We said that we would do an independent audit of the balancing pool. And so it's one more example of promise made, promise kept. And we confirmed, yeah, it was every bit as bad as we thought it was. And Albertans can see that the cost of their boondoggle was $1.34 billion.
The cost of the report?
No, the cost of the boondoggle was $1.34 billion. I don't have the cost with me. I can certainly get that to you.
Thanks, John.
Tom from Global News. I want to follow up on that.
Yep.
All the information you said here, we already knew, and we knew what the number was because we've been paying this surcharge for 3 or 4 years now. So what new did we learn from this report?
It wasn't about what's new. It was about confirming what we thought we knew, and that's what this report does. This independent report confirms that it was $1.34 billion because nobody knew the exact amount, and most Albertans didn't have any clarity to what that number was at all. So what this does is it delivers on a campaign commitment to shine the light on the billion-dollar boondoggle. This is $1.34 billion that Albertans have to pay off through a rate rider. And as we all know, the balancing pool has actually returned $4 billion back to the ratepayer over the years, except for that period under which the NDP were in government, and they cost ratepayers $1.34 billion because of an ideological agenda.
I'm curious, you spoke about the federal carbon tax and the NDP carbon tax having an impact on investment in thermal power generation, whereas it's actually the provincial, it's TIER, ESCR, the carbon tax actually put in by the PC government. Can you square that? Why do you keep talking about the federal carbon tax, the federal Liberals, when it comes to projects that would be charged under the Alberta TIER program?
Well, make no mistake, our TIER program, which has been a provincial equivalency, would be a different program because if we did not have that program, the feds would be overlaying their carbon tax over top of it. So while yes, it's a provincial program, it's a program that we had to come up with as a mitigation to the federal carbon tax, and we would not have had a a program that was as punishing to Albertans or to investors had it not been for these progressive politicians and their agenda. And please don't, I don't want this to be misinterpreted at all. We recognize that it's important to decarbonize. Climate change is real, and human activity has contributed to the changing of the climates. But we need to move forward in a methodical manner, and a manner that is responsible. And right now, Albertans are struggling from inflation, from higher interest rates. Everything is being made more expensive, and contributing to that, of course, is the carbon tax.
Thanks, Tom. We'll move over to the phones. Operator, can you put in the first call, please?
Fargo, Calgary Herald.
Yeah, Minister, you talked about the $1.34 billion that was lost. Can you explain exactly how was that money lost? Where was the money lost to?
Well, when the NDP changed the specified gas emitters regulation, it triggered a clause in the PPAs that said if the PPAs, through a change of law, become unprofitable or more unprofitable, then they could return those PPAs. Now, it's not lost on any of us that if the NDP had simply read the fine print, this all could have been avoided. But they didn't. They triggered that clause, and the PPAs were returned. And so the losses were primarily related to the sale of those PPAs, and of course to settle disputes towards the terminated PPAs, and also some expenses for financing operations.
Do you follow up, Chris?
Yeah, the promise that the UCP party made on the campaign trail back in 2019 was that you would instruct the Auditor General to conduct a special duty audit of the PPA losses. Mm-hmm. Why did you decide not to send this to the Auditor General, but instead to have this done by a third party?
For transparency, our position was that we don't think Albertans were concerned who did the audit, but rather that it was an independent organization that did the audit. And quite frankly, Deloitte fit that bill, and there can be no suggestions that there was any interference in that whatsoever, and that's why we went with Deloitte, to be transparent with Albertans. And we think that what Albertans are concerned about the most was the results of the audit and what it said, as opposed to who performed it.
Thank you, everyone. That's all the questions we have, so we'll wrap up there today.
Okay, thank you, everybody.